The land where the Willamette and Columbia rivers meet has been home to dozens of different native nations since time immemorial. For thousands of years, tribes such as the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Clackamas, and many, many others created communities here. They established villages along the rivers where they hunted elk, fished for salmon, and collected roots and berries that were plentiful in those lush wetlands. Since settlers first forcefully occupied this land in the mid-1800s, the city of Portland has failed to build trust with sovereign tribal leaders and Indigenous residents. In 1866, just over a decade after the city was incorporated, the marshal, who was essentially the head of the city's police department, wrote a letter to then-Mayor Henry Failing.
Yesterday, it was reported to me that the Indians encamped in the north part of the city were infected with the smallpox.
The marshal goes on to say that he took steps to surveil the group of people camped on the city's outskirts and prevented them from entering city limits. It does not say anything about offering them any medical assistance. That letter from the marshal is one of the earliest records of the city of Portland's tribal relations work. The city archives have no further details about what became of this group of people who may have been infected with smallpox. A century later, the city saw an influx of native residents as the federal government began to cut support to reservations, dissolve people's tribal status, and urge Native Americans to move to cities and assimilate. It was a traumatizing time for Native people, known as the Termination Era. It was also an opportunity for cities like Portland to embrace and support Native people who were relocating. From the Gert Boyle studio, I'm Jen Chavez, and this is The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB about the place you call home. OPB reporter Alex Zielinski recently teamed up with Nika Bartoo-Smith, a reporter for _Native News and ICT, to dig into the city of Portland's relationship with tribal governments and Native communities. I'm going to hand this episode off to them to talk about what they found.
Hi, I'm Nika. I am of Osage and Oneida Nations descent, and I also have Northern European and Indonesian ancestry.
And I'm Alex, and I don't have any Native ancestry. I'm of European descent. When I learned that the city had fired its latest tribal relations manager last fall, I knew I wanted to dig deeper into this story. That's when I reached out to Nika, who has done incredible reporting on Indigenous communities in the area. This was also around the time that Portlanders were electing leaders in its new form of government. And it was one of those things where enough people had cycled in and out of the Tribal Relations Office in such a short period of time that we really felt like it was time to find out what was going on.
Adam Becenti is Dene, and he's the person who most recently held a tribal relations position with the city of Portland. He was fired after only 5 months on the job.
Yeah, and something that sticks with me from my interview with him is this idea that this kind of job is just not set up for success.
A month ago, I was talking with a Yakima tribal member, and he told me that when Native people work in positions like tribal liaisons or tribal relations, they often take bullets in the chest from the white world and arrows in the back from their own tribal people. And what he was saying is that it's hard to meet the demands of serving non-Native governments or institutions while trying to make change or remove barriers for your people. You do too much for one side, you will get criticized or reprimanded. You do too little, you still get criticized from both sides.
I think this absolutely rings true to many experiences I have heard expressed from other Native folks, particularly those working in colonial systems of government.
One of the big questions I had was, how did we end up here? Because there was a time not that long ago when the city of Portland was seen as a leader in rethinking the city's relationships with tribal leaders and Native residents.
Let's go back to the Termination Era in the 1950s and 60s, because that's part of what led to Portland having such a large population of Native residents.
Okay, yeah.
So that was a violent, brutal period in our history. Really, the aim of the federal government at that time was to terminate and end their relationships, and thus their responsibilities to Native nations and people all across the country. And that meant not recognizing them as sovereign nations who were here long before settlers and colonizers first came. And really across the board, it was an era of assimilation and attempted cultural genocide. There are Native nations across the country, including here in the Pacific Northwest, that are still fighting for their federal recognition to be restored.
Yeah, and that's an important backdrop to what was going on at the city level. Like Jen said in her intro, there were a lot of Native people who moved to Portland at that time, and they were struggling to find jobs and get connected with resources. And of course, they were also dealing with racism and marginalization.
So that makes me think about the Relocation Act, which encouraged Native people to leave their homelands and the reservations and come to other urban centers like Portland for jobs and really for assimilation. I think that really is important to not forget that one of the main goals of this era was that assimilation, that cultural genocide, that attempting of cultural genocide. It means now Portland has the 9th largest urban Indigenous population in the country. And it also means that there's a lot of unique needs for urban Indigenous people living in urban centers such as Portland. Because so often, so many of us are living away from our historic homelands, from our nations.
Yeah, and it means the city has an opportunity and a responsibility, really, to help care for those people who were basically forced to come here.
In the early 1970s, elected officials in Portland drafted a plan to help its new Native residents. The idea was to connect them with healthcare, education, and job programs, but it kind of went nowhere.
In our search of city archives, we didn't find much about what was called the Urban Indian Program. We did find a letter from Ron Buell, who was the chief of staff to then Mayor Neil Goldschmidt. In 1973, Buell wrote this letter criticizing the early draft of the program for not going far enough to, in his words, rectify past mistakes and right current wrongs.
Unfortunately, that effort fizzled. The city didn't seize the opportunity to help its growing Native communities, and Portland city government didn't revisit its relationship with its Native residents or neighboring tribal governments until about 4 decades later.
I was born and raised in Portland and grew up in the Native community.
Laura John was the first person to hold a full-time position in the city's tribal relations program. She's a descendant of the Blackfeet and Seneca nations, and she grew up surrounded by a strong, self-reliant community.
This would be, 70s, 80s, 90s. And I had the opportunity growing up to see the power of voice, of uplifting the Native community's needs that was done by the adults when I was growing up. A lot of them were involved in grassroots community advocacy efforts. Many of those efforts that I benefited from, one being the parents in the community when I was preschool age had started a preschool. So I got to go to that Native preschool, and it shaped who I am today.
The job that Laura John applied for in 2017 was the result of many conversations with tribal leaders and community members.
If you read the job description, it's a job description for about 3 or 4 people. And it was just me.
But Laura was undaunted. She got right to work. She spent months researching the few state and city tribal relations programs that existed across the U.S.
Then she established tribal liaisons in each city bureau, people she could regularly check in with about work that may intersect with tribes. She created training to educate employees on treaty rights and advised the city on its legal requirements to work with tribal governments on major city projects, like with the Bull Run water filtration plant.
For decades, Portland police weren't required to follow tribal court orders that offer protections to Native victims of certain crimes, including domestic violence, sexual assault, and harassment. Laura helped create a city policy mandating that PPB recognize these orders.
And we changed language in the police directives. And actually doing that work got the attention of the Attorney General at the time and the attention of the state of Oregon, which then followed our lead.
The city held its first Tribal Nations Summit in 2018, which brought officials from 7 Native nations into City Hall to discuss their priorities.
For some of the tribes, this was the first time that the city had ever reached out to them and invited them in.
This face-to-face meeting gave city leaders a new appreciation for their peers in tribal government.
It was amazing to see once they did their presentation and then the tribal leaders started asking questions. It was clear, based on the types of questions that they were asking, These are high-level individuals. There were some tribal leaders that said, I've testified in Congress about this issue. Some of those bureau directors, they sat up straighter in their chair. Their tone and framing of what they were saying and how they were responding shifted.
After the 2018 summit, city officials began visiting tribes more regularly to discuss overlapping issues and build relationships. But that work, like so many things, got derailed by the COVID-19 pandemic.
The face-to-face meetings that had been so powerful couldn't continue, and the city began shirking its commitments to the Tribal Relations Program. The city had a self-imposed 2021 deadline to establish a land acknowledgement statement, create training for all staff on tribal nations, and formalize a plan for how the city should partner with sovereign tribal governments. That deadline came and went with nothing achieved.
Coming up after a break, we'll hear why Laura John resigned from a position she once thought of as a dream job, and what happened to the job after that. Thanks for listening to The Evergreen, our podcast from OPB about the place you call home. If you've been listening for a while, you're probably familiar with our At Work With series. That's where we interview Pacific Northwesterners who have interesting jobs and ask them some of your questions about what they do. Next up, we're heading to work with a construction flagger. What questions do you have about the work of regulating traffic and protecting pedestrians? Please send them to us in an email or a voice memo. You can reach us at theevergreen@opb.org. And now, back to Nika Bartoo-Smith and Alex Zielinski and their deep dive into Portland's Tribal Relations Program.
Okay, so when we left off, we were talking about Laura John and her experience as the first person to hold a full-time position in the City of Portland's Tribal Relations Program.
She made a lot of headway, but her progress got stalled, in part by the pandemic. She also said she didn't have the resources she needed to do everything that was expected in the role.
There was no way for one person to do this work. Absolutely no way. This was enough work for a team.
The city did add 2 positions to the Tribal Relations Program, though shortly after that, Laura ended up taking a leave of absence because of stress related to her job and because she had to have knee surgery.
Even with the 2 positions, when I was out on medical leave, the OGR's admin assistant was sort of fielding my emails. And I had a conversation with her. She said, you get so many emails. I don't even know how you keep up. You could just answer emails. I said, I know. I could use an admin assistant.
One of the issues with the program is that it was meant to serve as a hub for connections with tribal governments in the surrounding area, as well as Native communities within the city. Those are related, but separate endeavors, and it made the scope of the job very wide.
The requests were broad-ranging requests. The work included land use planning and law enforcement, standard operating procedure, public art, and it was just this wide range of work. And fielding all of the requests that were coming externally from the city, whether it was tribal governments or community or local governments that wanted to partner, or it was a lot.
And while Laura was out on leave, the city hired a new person to be her boss.
This was in 2023. The city hired former Metro Councilor Sam Chase, who is not Native, to lead its Office of Government Relations. That's the office that oversaw the Tribal Relations Program. This was after 3 tumultuous years of leadership changes in the Office of Government Relations, including some time when there was no one to fill the role.
It was 3 years of feeling not supported and alone. I didn't have anyone that had my back, and I didn't have anyone that was, my support, right? My supervisor that really understood the work and the vision for the framework. And that was really challenging.
Laura returned from medical leave in the spring of 2023, and on her first day back, her new boss, Sam Chase, said he was going to place her on a performance improvement plan for not completing projects quickly enough, among other things.
Laura said she felt like she was being forced out of the job. The stress of her return to work prompted her doctor to recommend that she go back on medical leave. By the end of April, Sam Chase informed her that she would be laid off if she didn't return from medical leave, stating that she had exhausted all available leave options.
Laura chose to resign and accepted a severance payout. She said she felt like she had no other option.
After she left, the city eliminated the 2 positions she had created in the Tribal Relations Program. Miranda Michon, a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation, had previously held one of those positions. She took over Laura's job after Laura resigned, but then she chose to leave after 5 months.
So then the position sat vacant for nearly 6 months before Sam Chase hired Adam Basenti to lead the program in April 2024. Prior to taking the job at the city, Adam led the Office of Tribal Affairs for the Oregon Department of Human Services. My sense is that he came in focused on rebuilding trust within the Native communities across the city. I saw him at a lot of different events.
I felt confident and well-resourced going into this position because I had at least a good awareness of what's happening in Portland, or at least of the organizations that are doing the work here.
So Adam's first assignment was to establish a new strategic plan for the Tribal Relations Program, one that could help set it on course to meet the needs of Portland's new government. He said he felt a lot of pressure to get this done quickly.
It takes time for relationships with tribes and Native Indigenous communities to form, to grow, to strengthen, and even at times be repaired. The pressure I endured as a city employee is an example how government norms conflict with tribal culture.
Sam Chase fired Adam Basenti after 5 months on the job. Sam wrote about the program's problems in a memo, which we received through a public records request. He pointed to issues he had with Adam making commitments to tribes or city officials without Sam's approval. He said he also had concerns about Adam missing deadlines regarding the strategic plan.
Sam wrote in the memo, quote, Adam has a strong resistance to collaboration and partnership with subject matter experts and leadership within the city.
Adam was given the choice to step down or be fired. He chose firing because, he said, he had no desire to leave the role. That meant, unlike Laura John, he didn't receive a severance package. Looking back, Adam said he believes the city had misplaced priorities.
The purpose of a position like tribal relations is to be of service to tribes and the Native community first. While working for the city, this wasn't the directive. I was asked often how my actions or work benefited the city or city leaders, when we should have been asking how this benefits tribes and the Portland Indigenous community. At that time I was working for the city, I felt confused, conflicted, and stressed on who I should prioritize, knowing I was always taught to serve the collective community before the system.
Sam Chase has also had time to reflect on what happened, and he says he had a steep learning curve when it comes to different aspects of tribal relations.
Well, I think when I first started out, I didn't really understand the differences between, I think, going through the communication process around like, hey, how does the community engagement work and how does the tribal engagement, like those, the distinction between those two was really something I got educated on from the community, from the tribes, from the, tribes saying, hey, just because you included us in a community engagement process, like actually we don't want to participate in that community. We're our own government and we want to have our own communication. And so it was like, oh, okay, getting that kind of input, I think, was really helpful.
He told me he's learning how to slow down when making decisions about the program, especially as a non-Native person.
In March of this year, Portland announced plans to hire a new tribal relations program manager. This time, the position is more narrowly focused on serving as a liaison between city and tribal governments. We're recording this in July, and so far, the city has not made any announcements about a hire.
I'm also hearing that the city is interested in creating a separate position outside the Office of Government Relations to focus on community engagement work with Native Portlanders.
There's a lot of uncertainty in the relationships among Native Portlanders and the city government. And that's true for the sovereign tribal governments and their relationships with the city as well.
Yeah, in November, after Adam Basenti was fired, there was a meeting that included top city officials. The outgoing and incoming mayors were both there, and an Indigenous leadership organization called Portland Indian Leaders Roundtable.
So I wasn't there, but I heard it was really tense. A lot of people came to vent their frustration about Adam being fired. And, as you can imagine, a lot of other stuff came up as well. Ultimately, Native people who came to the meeting didn't feel like they'd been heard. So the Portland Indian Leaders Roundtable, as well as individual members, followed up with a series of letters. Will Miller is a point person for the group. He's Blackfeet and Cherokee, and he's the executive director for the NAYA Action Fund, a political advocacy group lobbying for Native communities across Oregon and Washington.
One of the letters that we previously sent on the outset of Adam's termination stated that the Office of Government Relations at the City of Portland was unfit for Native people, or not safe for Native people. And I think that time and time again, we've seen just harm done to Native people who have been in roles in the Office of Government Relations at the City of Portland, which was the precipice for this letter.
And I think that kind of encapsulates not only the missed opportunities, but how the city's handling of this role over the past several years has actually made things worse in some ways.
Yeah, I think it's really important to just ground in the fact that there's this historic distrust of government among many Native people, and rightfully so.
To kind of zoom out and get the bigger picture view, I talked to Michaela Madrid about this. She's a member of the Lower Brule Sioux tribe in central South Dakota, and she got her master's in public policy at Portland State University. Her work has focused on intergovernmental relationships with tribes, and she now works for the Native Governance Center.
It's taken us hundreds of years to get to this point. It's gonna take more than 50 years to kind of untangle this colonial mess that we're in. And so it's give us the time to do that in a right way, in a healing way. Because a lot of these things are really tied to traumas and to really terrible things that have happened in our families. And so moving through that just gives us the time and space to make sure that we're not being reactionary or acting out of trauma or just trying to do something for a quick fix.
Yeah, if there's one thing that's clear about all this, it's that there are no quick fixes. And you just can't ignore the ugly history that's underlying all of this.
You would not be a city if you did not have the land underneath all of your buildings or underneath all of your parks. And the only way that you got that land was through genocide and removal.
Michaela has been studying and engaging with this work for a long time, and she is hopeful about tribal people and city governments working together in a way that benefits everyone.
And something that I've heard a long time ago in this work that really still sticks with me is that it's not that people don't care, it's that they don't know. And once they know, then they care. And so I really think that really to help people understand, it's understanding that true history of how we got here. And then also thinking about the fact that we have so much knowledge of the lands that you sit on. We can help add to kind of the narrative of this area. We can tell you our stories about how this land was formed and created and how to take care of it.
And even though it's unclear exactly how the new tribal relations position or positions will be structured within the city of Portland, the new form of government seems like it does offer a bit more security than we saw before.
Yes, the Tribal Relations Program used to live under the mayor's office, and now it's overseen by a far more independent city administrator, which means its support is not at the whim of a political office as much. And if councilors want to lobby for it, they have the chance to introduce legislation under this new form pretty easily.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to follow along and see what happens with this office, especially once they fill the new role. Native people have given the city a lot of feedback and really made their voices heard, and we'll just have to see what the city does with that.
Whatever happens, we're going to keep covering it. Nika Bartoo-Smith is a reporter for _Native News and ICT. Alex Zielinski reports on Portland city government for OPB. You can read their full coverage of Portland's relationship with Native tribes at opb.org. Thank you for listening to The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB. Julie Sabatier produced this episode, and our technical director is Stephen Cray. Stephen engineered the episode as well. The OPB podcast team also includes Mia Estrada, Sage Van Wing, and our intern, Malia Fass. Nika Bartoo-Smith and Alex Zielinski did the interviews you heard, and Jeff Norcross did the reading from the 1866 letter. The music in this episode is from Audio Network. And hey, if you've got a question for us, please reach out. Email theevergreen@opb.org. I'm Jen Chavez. Catch you later.